Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, we look at legislative threats against the Sikh community, creeping authoritarianism designed to clamp down specifically on Sikhs in the supposed free and democratic West. As the community celebrates Vaisakhi, we look at some significant initiatives launched to promote the community in our multicultural Western society, focusing on its heroic legacy. And talking of initiatives and legacy, we report on the entrepreneurial Sikh genius who's logged more patents than Thomas Edison, and a significant new module for US schools educating the next generation about standing up to injustice using by Jaswant Singh Khalra as the role model. And finally, Sikhs for Justice are offering a $25,000 reward for tracking down 3 missing Indian diplomats implicated in that Kanishka bombing. Well, we'll look at the evidence as more people start to question that initial official narrative. All this and more on today's show. And of course, at the end of the show, we'll take a look at loads of great comments which have been filling up beneath the video. So thank you to our wonderful audience for that. Right, let's get underway. So a lot to get through this morning. And yes, we talk about this creeping authoritarianism, certainly over well, we've seen it in India, but of course in our Western societies, we are certainly not immune to it. There is this sort of perceived global threat now against the Sikh community and the Sikh identity, obviously pushed primarily from India. So I want to start at looking at how this landscape is shifting for the Sikh diaspora, particularly here in the West. And for decades, we've operated under this basic belief that Western democracies are the ultimate safeguards of religious freedom. But unfortunately, as we look at the headlines coming out of countries like here in the UK and actually specifically New Zealand this week, the assumption is being rather tested. What we're seeing is a bit of a trend of creeping authoritarianism. Laws, definitions being drafted in these high political offices that, intentionally or not, are starting to leave the Sikh community a little bit nervous and in a bit more of a precarious position. So I want you to take a look at this. This is a crowdfunding campaign that was just recently launched here in the UK, titled "Freedom of Religion for Sikhs is Under Threat." So what's going on and why is this happening now? It's back to a story I did cover quite recently. It is the UK government currently getting itself in a mess over a debate over the formal definition of Islamophobia. Now, on the surface, protecting any community from hatred is the right thing to do. It's an honourable, noble thing to do. It is a goal that we should all aspire to. But here's where we need to start actually just working out what really is going on here, what's going on behind the scenes. When a government begins to create specific, siloed legal definitions for one religion while ignoring others, it creates a hierarchy of protection. In other words, one religion is somehow more important than other people's religions. And if the UK adopts a narrow definition of Islamophobia that doesn't account for the unique way Sikhs are targeted, for example, and often misidentified or attacked for Sikh articles of faith and, ironically, misidentified as Muslims, where does that leave us? And we've seen this before. When the state starts picking and choosing which phobias or which hate crimes or whatever to codify into law, it often results in, for example, the Sikh identity being lumped into a generic Asian category and all the problems that come with that. Or worse, it completely ignores when specific Sikh areas are targeted, whether it's the Gurdwaras or Sikh youths are attacked for their dastars or whatever. And it's not just a matter of semantics. It really matters. It's a matter of legal standing. It's a matter of legal recognition of Sikhs, particularly and specifically, but also other religions, other minorities that lose out to this preference for one specific religion. Basically, the Sikh community is fighting a battle with one hand tied behind its back. And it's not just, as it turns out, it's not just a UK problem. This lack of understanding and this resulting legal overreach, this law-making overreach, it's a global issue for the Sikh community. And this is why I talk about New Zealand. I want to cross down to New Zealand. I came across this yesterday on social media and I was quite shocked. It's all about The Kirpan, again, it ties into this sort of global legislative overreach. It's all about ignorance. And we often talk about ignorance being very visible. And this is it in its most ugliest form. And this is being circulated by a group called Vision New Zealand. The Kirpan, we talk a lot about the Kirpan on this show. Obviously, an article of faith. It's a symbol of a Sikh's duty to stand up against injustice. It represents the sword. But it's been characterised, once again, by this group, presumably it's a right-wing extremist group, it's been characterised as a weapon, as an offensive weapon, that therefore should be banned in public spaces. Now, when I saw this, I thought, oh God, here we go again. And we've often talked about the Kirpan, whether it's, here in the UK, in schools, whether it's in the United States, a taxi driver arrested for carrying his Kirpan, etc. But those cases always fall apart legally because those countries have recognised the Kirpan for what it is. It is an article of faith. It is not an offensive weapon. And this, and what I did notice on the comments after this specific post are a cocktail, a mix of right-wing extremism views, predictable stuff, and pure, simple ignorance. People are calling for a ban. Ordinary, what I would sort of describe as ordinary middle-class, decent, normal, law-abiding citizens are calling for a ban because they're fearful. It's out of ignorance. They fear this. They just see it, somebody's carrying a knife, a dagger, a weapon. But it's always the child of ignorance. When a political group or a government fails to educate people, or even itself, on why the Kirpan is carried, they fall back to their default position, which is let's ban it, because they don't understand it, so let's ban it. If you don't understand something, let's just ban it. That is their default position. The reality is, whether it's a bureaucratic definition here in London or a populist campaign like this in New Zealand, the results are always the same. We see the shrinking of the space in which a Sikh can exist authentically. In India, we see the state weaponising laws to persecute minorities, particularly Sikhs and Muslims, under the guise of national security. But here in the West, we're not there yet. But these creeping changes are those very first steps towards a system where Sikh identity is managed by the state rather than protected by it. In other words, the state determines what you as a Sikh should be identified by. Not you, not your own religion, not even the gurus. This essentially is the state taking control over what it decides you can portray to be as a Sikh. And you've got to ask the question, why is, and coming back to that first section, why is therefore one religion being favoured with specific legal definitions while 500-year-old articles of faith, Sikh articles of faith, are treated as security threats? And this is why the work of organisations like Sikh Federation, Sikh Coalition, all those other organisations that often form coalitions to fight back against this. Their work is so vital. They're not just fighting for rights. They're actually fighting for the very recognition of who Sikhs are. They are literally fighting for Sikh identity. So the lesson here is very clear. Do not let the relaxed demeanour of Western politics fool you. Don't be lulled into this false sense of security that we all live in this free democratic society. These legislative shifts, these little steps that I've just pointed here, need to be scrutinised closely, carefully. They require our absolute attention and collective voice to pick them apart and question them, to hold them to account. Because if Sikhs don't define themselves legally in things like this, someone else will. And someone who doesn't actually understand or even care about the Khalsa, or worse, doesn't like the Khalsa. And they will do it for you. So, be warned. So let's up the feeling a bit, the sentiment. It's going to be a bit more positive. Vaisakhi. Happy Vaisakhi to everybody. The weekend, obviously, is going to see a lot of celebrations of Vaisakhi. And there are a lot of myths surrounding Vaisakhi and the Sikh coalition as they do. This is the World Sikh Organisation of Canada have done the same thing. The Sikh coalition did it last year, I recall. They always like to sort of bust a few myths. Let's just get the truth out about Vaisakhi, because of course there's always a little bit of misinterpretation, misunderstanding even in the public domain about what Vaisakhi is about. But as we look at the mainstream media, and especially the state-controlled outlets in India, for example, you'll see a very specific, very diluted version of what Vaisakhi is all about. They want you to believe it's just a colourful harvest festival or some sort of folk celebration. It's not. It's obviously a lot more significant than that. It's a lot more meaningful. And we need to reclaim this narrative. Every year, actually, we have to go through this same process. It's not just a change in the calendar. It isn't the new year. It is the anniversary of the birth of a nation, the birth of a sovereign people. So, as I say, we'll start with a little bit of myth busting for argument's sake. And one of the prime ones, it's not the harvest festival, thrown around by those who want to try to secularise and diminish the real Sikh element of Vaisakhi, the real Sikh identity part of it. Vaisakhi did coincide with the harvest in Punjab. Guru Gobind Singh Ji chose the day in 1699 for a far more radical and more significant purpose. It just happened to coincide with harvest. It was the creation of the Khalsa. He didn't gather the Sangat to celebrate crops and the harvesting of the crops. He gathered them to volunteer their heads for a cause. He transformed a downtrodden people into a sovereign body. A body of saint soldiers, the Sant Sipahis. So when we call it Harvest Festival, we're accidentally helping the state suppress that political reality of the Khalsa, of the sovereignty of the Sikh people. So again, they feel so threatened by the whole Khalistan movement, they're trying to undermine it from every possible angle. And of course, one of the easiest ones to aim for is, let's call it this Harvest Festival. It's not the establishment of the Khalsa. They don't want that appearing, because that implies sovereignty. That supports the whole feeling, sentiment for Khalistan. So again, this is why we've got to fight back and say it's not to do with the Harvest Festival. It is the establishment of the Khalsa. Now, another myth was that the Khalsa was created to protect Hindus. The Khalsa was created to uphold dharam, righteousness, and to fight oppression wherever it existed. That's why it prevails today. This is why the Sikh spirit prevails today, because Sikhi is imbued with this inherent desire, need, obsession almost, requirement, obligation, whatever you want to call it, choose your word, to fight oppression wherever it exists. So the Khalsa itself, the establishment of the Khalsa, was a declaration of independence from the caste system, for one thing, from the Mughal Empire, and from any earthly authority that sought to enslave the human spirit. It was a cry for freedom. It was a pushback against oppression. So the Khalsa owes its allegiance only to the Akal Purak, the timeless one. This distinction is important, particularly today, because of course and again I report this so regularly, we have to fight back against this. The Indian state is trying every possible angle to absorb Sikhism into its own Hindu fold, its own Hindutva ideology, through their Hindutva agenda. So, marking the legacy today, it's not just about looking back. It's important that we do look back and we re-establish the truth of what Vaisakhi represents and celebrate that as publicly as we can. But it's also about the future, and it's about putting out a legacy for the future. And this actually leads on to, I'm delighted to say, a story I picked up just the other day. This is in West London. And it's timely, really, this, because, of course, as we celebrate Vaisakhi, it's timely to remind the population, the society as a greater whole, of who Sikhs are, what they represent. Vaisakhi is a part of what Sikhs obviously represent, but it's also about the legacy that Sikhs bring to the table. And this is what this is all about. Southall in West London. This is the picture you can see here. This is a 1.8 metre bronze statue of a Sikh soldier. And there is a proposal to have a permanent war memorial installed in Southall in London. just to pay tribute, obviously, to the soldiers who gave their lives. And it was inscribed with De Shiva Ba Mohe Ehe. My pronunciation will be totally wrong. Hopefully you understand what I meant there. But it is a permanent reminder in the heart of the diaspora that the Khalsa spirit we've been talking about is defined by, effectively, iron and blood. Over 83,000 Sikhs gave their lives in 2 world wars, giving their lives for our freedom, for our democracy that we obviously represent today, that we enjoy today, that all of us, from whichever background here in the West, we enjoy. 83,000 Sikhs, as part of that Commonwealth army, gave their lives in those 2 world wars, fighting the forces of oppression, fighting fascism. Sikhs were only 1% of the population, providing 20% of the strength. That's their disproportionate contribution. So placing this memorial, as it's proposed, in Southall in London, it's a message to the world. Sikh sovereignty is not a modern extremist invention, as India tries to sort of push it. It's a historical fact, paid for in sacrifice. This monument, therefore, it's not just a symbolic monument to the past. It's not just reminding people of the huge sacrifice that Sikhs gave. It's a shield. It's a shield against this RSS-driven narrative trying to label the push for khalistan as somehow new or radical or extremist or a bunch of terrorists. It's linking Sikh history, Sikh sacrifice to the khalistan story. It's reminding people that Sikhs have a history inextricably linked to the British Empire for a start. And it's also reminding people that Sikh history, as proven by the blood spilt across Europe and India in 2 world wars and North Africa, that blood was spilt fighting for freedom, fighting for justice against oppression. It's proving that Sikhs are defenders of the oppressed. Basically, it's sending a message into the local communities that Sikhs and the Khalistan movement represents the same values that we all hold dear. They're not a bunch of terrorists, as India again repeatedly tries to portray. Sikhs and the Khalistan movement represent everything that this statue represents. And that's the message being reminded to people. So again, I sort of link this to sort of Vaisakhi because again, it carries this sort of same message of celebrating the past, but it's also educating the public about the future. And talking about educating the public in the future, this really is where you guys come in, right across the diaspora. Sikh Coalition has actually released, and I did touch on this the other day, I gave a bit more detail on it, but the Sikh Coalition has released this brilliant suite of resources to celebrate Vaisakhi this year. They're not just posters, they're actually a lot more than that. They're absolute tools. They are, it's a whole toolbox for advocacy. It's a whole toolbox that basically gives you everything you need to push the message into the community, into local councils, administrations, schools, whatever. Basically, it's to get that message of who Sikhs are and what they represent out into the wider community. They include all sorts of things like lesson plans, presentation templates, community guides, you name it, it's all there. But it's to help bring the real story of Vaisakhi into the children's classrooms or the local town hall. So again, this is all going back to what I was talking earlier. It's fighting back against not just creeping authoritarianism, it's fighting back against a fake narrative that comes from one source. We all know what that source is. And it always comes back to education. Ignorance, I mentioned about ignorance. It's fighting ignorance with education. In other words, it's up to all of us to explain to the world what Sikhi represents, to explain to the world the kirpan isn't a weapon, to explain to the world that Sikhs are committed to justice, freedom, etc. The onus is on us to explain. Vaisakhi is about human rights and sovereign dignity. So, as you all prepare for the Naga curtains, what have you, for Vaisakhi celebrations or just simple Gurdwara programs, use resources like this. Don't just celebrate. educate, reclaim that legacy as originally set out by the Guru and the establishment of the Khalsa that Vaisakhi is all about. And don't forget, Sikhs are not just guests in the West. They're not a subset of even a united India, as Hindutva like to remind people or tell people. Sikhs are, and it was a comment that came in yesterday's show, we are all Khalistan. You guys are all Khalistan. It might not have a geographical boundary yet, but Khalistan exists amongst the Sikh community as a state of mind, as a sovereign nation in that state of Sikh minds. Born in 1699, and that story is still being written. The final chapter is about to be written. The final establishment of Khalistan. That's what we're fighting for. So celebrate Vaisakhi. Don't forget what it's all about. But again, as I said, it's all also about educating the wider world, wider society. This is an interesting and delightful development I'm happy to report on. And again, it evolves a discussion about Vaisakhi into another story, but it's related to it. Vaisakhi, of course, was all about the foundation of Sikh sovereignty. But the story of this guy, by Jaswant Singh Khalra, who again is often a subject of stories I talk about, because this guy was such an example to all of us. His story is the ultimate modern proof of why Khalistan sovereignty is so necessary. And we do often talk about by Singh Khalra regularly on the show, not just as a sort of historical figure who lost his life sadly in the 80s after doing such incredible work. His legacy stands as a compass, a moral compass for the community's conscience going forward. He is the ideal, perfect example. So this is why this story is actually so important. Jaswant Singh Khalra was a man who looked into the abyss of state-sponsored murder, and he didn't blink. He gave his life, he sacrificed his life to highlight, to uncover the truth of thousands of disappeared Sikhs, those Sikhs who were extrajudicially murdered in the 80s and 90s, orchestrated by the Indian state and those butchers of Punjab, the police. An Indian state that claimed to be a democracy, still claims to be a democracy, but ultimately was an executioner, was a terrorist state running out of control. So Jaswant Singh Khalra was one of the key figures to stand up and highlight to the world. He brought that news to the world about what was going on. So it's fantastic now to hear that this new initiative, pushing his story into the US schools curriculum, it's called I Challenge the Darkness. It's a powerful title, deliberately chosen for a new unit of study. And it's an initiative by the Sikh Coalition, along with others. And a lady called Dr. Deer, and I'm going to just play a video where she introduces this. And it's a real game changer. It's a huge victory for the Sikh community. For years, the Indian state has obviously tried to bury the 80s and 90s under a blanket of silence. They're rather ashamed and embarrassed about it. Well, are they really? That's, I suppose, you can even question that statement. But certainly they want to bury it because it's a little bit uncomfortable when they try to promote the nation as some sort of democracy, some sort of beacon of democracy, when it most certainly isn't. They want Indian children to grow up with this fake narrative, this fake history that the Khalistan movement and the Sikh community, their story is one of militancy, of one of violence, of terrorism, rather than what it really was. It was a struggle for basic human rights. So let me play you, this is Dr. Deer, Dr. Kaur Deer. She introduces this. Have a listen to this. This is interesting.
Vaiguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaiguru Ji Ki Fateh. I'm Dr. Harpreet Kaur Deer, and I'm here to introduce you to a unit of study on Shaheed by Jaswant Singh Khalra Ji. This unit has been published by Sikh Coalition, and this unit of study is appropriate for grade 6 through 12th. It has 4 modules, and each module can be a standalone module, or teachers can teach this unit in its entirety based on time allowance that you have or the needs of the curriculum and students. The unit of study is based on History, Social Science C3 framework, as well as it integrates other areas such as language arts as well. The Shaheed by Jaswant Singh Khalra ji was a human rights activist, and he became the voice for those who were voiceless. He became the lamp. He highlighted those who had disappeared in the 1980s and 1990s in Punjab, India. And therefore, this unit of study centers on the theme of courage based on the actions of Bhai Khalra ji, who became a courageous change maker of modern times. Students, as they learn about Bhai Khalra ji's life, about his ancestry, about his actions, they will also get to examine their own courageous capacity in situations that may inspire their own courage. I think students will learn what it takes to be courageous and the fact that they actually have that courage in them as well, using the framework that has been introduced in this unit of study. It's called the 3 Pillars of Courage, and it includes the students' personal capacity, their action, and where their inspiration comes from, where they generate that courage. So it's an interesting unit of study. It's a learning experience centered on a concept that students may not have explored before, which is the concept of courage, and also learn about the struggle for human rights and justice as it was done by Khalra ji, who gave the ultimate price for that struggle. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Now, I've had a look myself at that module. I've scanned through the module. It's brilliant. It's a huge whole resource of information now available to schools, pre-packaged, big on fact. Obviously, the full context of his actions and why he did what he did. And of course, it forms a brilliant lesson in morality. Morality, of course, inherent, of course, as part of Sikhi. And I'm sure all of you guys are fully aware of what Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra ji did. And for those who don't know, he was a guy who discovered that his colleagues, he worked in a bank at the time in Punjab, his colleagues were disappearing day after day, never to be seen again. And he started getting a bit suspicious. Turned out he did a bit of research and he talked to local crematoria to discover that hundreds and then thousands of people, anonymous people, bodies were being cremated. No names, nothing about them. But clearly they were the bodies of those young Sikhs being murdered, taken out into the countryside and murdered in cold blood by the Punjab police as part of that crackdown on Sikhs at the time. And he actually identified tens of thousands of nameless cremated bodies who essentially were young Sikhs murdered by the Indian state. And he highlighted this fact to the Canadian Parliament at the time. He actually stood up in the Canadian Parliament in the 1980s and said, "Do you people realise what is going on as we speak in India?" No, nobody did. And he was the first person to raise the truth of what was going on. As a result of what he did, when he went back to the Punjab, he himself was disappeared. He was taken by the police, he was tortured, he was murdered, and likewise disappeared. So he paid the ultimate price. So his efforts, his work lives on. His legacy lives on. Hugely important, hugely powerful. And this is why he stands as this fantastic example, excuse me, for the youth of today on how to stand up for what is right, how to stand up for the truth, how ultimately to give the ultimate, pay the ultimate price for standing up for truth and pushing back against those forces that we all need to push back against. And by pushing this curriculum into grades 6 to 12 in the US schools curriculum, it's important because it's ensuring that the next generation of kids, the future doctors, lawyers, the future leaders, they understand how important the truth is. And of course, equally importantly, is the cost of truth. And this ultimately is how we all fight back. It's how the Sikh diaspora fights back against India. But it's a lesson to all of us, even outside the Sikh community, about how we do fight back against similar oppression. We don't just complain about biased textbooks. We don't just complain about stuff we see. We write our own. We get out there. We actually act. We campaign. All of us become activists. We get off our backsides and do things about it. We follow this wonderful example of Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra ji. Ultimately, we're turning the story of this Shaheed, this martyr, who was murdered for counting the dead, into a lesson on courage for students in the West. It's a fantastic example. And talking of fantastic examples, it's worth honouring this guy again. I came across this story, Gurtej Singh Sandhu. This is extraordinary. another fruit of Sikh resilience. And we honour, as we do regularly, those who stand against the darkness of the Indian state. But we also, in the same breath, we've got to recognise those moving the diaspora forward in such a positive way. Those who are lighting up the future. This is, as I say, Gurtej Singh Sandhu. He's a brilliant Sikh scientist. He's just made history. What he's done, he's just surpassed the great historic figure of Thomas Edison to become the 7th top inventor in the world by registering 1,382 US patents, however you want to pronounce it. From semiconductors to the very memory chips that power the phone that you're probably watching this on, or the device you're watching this on, Gurtej Sandhu is the architect of basically the modern world. This lad, he was born in India, but his genius obviously has managed to flourish in the diaspora. Well, why? It's because in a system in India that weaponizes laws against minorities like Sikhs, treats its most intelligent Sikhs with suspicion. That's not an environment to encourage people like this to fulfill their potential. It encourages a brain drain. Watch my podcast with Dr. Graywell, particularly if you want to know more about that brain drain from Punjab. People like this end up leaving Punjab because they can't flourish, they can't pursue and fulfill their potential, as this guy clearly has done. And it does then beg the question, imagine what Punjab could be if it wasn't stifled by a central government in Delhi driven by Hindutva philosophy or ideology. Imagine a sovereign state where the spirit of Bhai Singh Khalra ji's justice meets the brilliance of this guy, Gurtej Sandhu, and his innovation, and the thousands of other Sikhs, probably equally talented, currently held back by the straitjacket of India that they're living in. The Sikh community is a community that produces world-class martyrs and world-class inventors. It really pushes the boundaries. Sikh history isn't just a record of a record of victimhood. It's never been about that. It's more a record of what the Sikh community is capable of, despite being the target of such oppression for centuries. So whether it's all about challenging the agenda abusing human rights across the diaspora within India, or whether it's inventing the future, the Khalsa spirit is absolutely writ large in wonderful stories like that. So just combining the story of Jaswant Singh Khalra, great Shaheed who stood up for truth and justice and gave the ultimate sacrifice, through to Gurtej Singh Sandhu, who's pushing the scientific boundaries. This is the real legacy of the Sikh community. This is what Khalistan essentially stands for. And this is why Khalistan is so important, because it will be built, sustained by the genes of these guys that run through the current generation and future generations. Today's last story. I'm going to go back briefly to this story. Yes, last week we talked about the CIA whistleblower, this guy, John Kirikou, who appeared on the Chris Hedges report. And just as an offhand comment, said, of course we all know India was behind the Air India Kanishka bombing, Flight 182 in 1985. And that, of course, has set social media ablaze. YouTube's ablaze. We're ablaze with it. that revelation. We all know it. But we've waited for somebody in a more official capacity to admit it. And this guy, an ex-CIA official, has actually admitted it in an interview, in an offhand comment. Yeah, of course, it's common knowledge. Raw were behind the Flight 182 bombing, to blame it on Khalistanis. Anyway, unsurprisingly, I say, the social media is ablaze. Our old friend Jaswant Singh Khalra's jumped on this as well, because why wouldn't it? This is a gift to Sikhs for Justice. For years, of course, the Indian state narrative has used the Kanishka bombing, this tragedy, as a stick to beat the Khalistan movement. We see it over and over again, whether it's the official narrative, even on social media. Anybody who's fighting the Hindutva cause or aligns with the Hindutva cause has always used the Air India bombing as that stick to beat the Khalistan movement. Oh, they're a bunch of terrorists. Look at that bombing. They brought down a plane. But the truth, as always, as I always say, the truth prevails. The truth always has a way of just finding its way to the surface, even if it takes 40 years. Now, this interview with John Kiriki, he explicitly pointed the finger at Indian intelligence, RAW, Research and Analysis Wing, for being behind the plot. It's not just speculation. This guy is, as I said, he's a high-level whistleblower. At the very heart, he was at the very heart of American intelligence operations. So he knows, as I said at the time, he knows his onions. He knows his stuff. So it is more than likely true. Now, as I say, Jaswant Singh Khalra's jumped on this. And he's actually looked at a different angle to this, which I think actually I'm finding quite interesting. I'm going to talk about this in a moment. Let me just play a few bits from his video.
The question is, who is blamed and who is responsible? ਇਲਜ਼ਾਮ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਭਾਈ ਤਲਵਿੰਦਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਪਰਮਾਰ ਤੇ, ਪਰ ਏਅਰ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਬੰਬ ਧਮਾਕੇ ਦੇ ਪਰਿਵਾਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਹੈ ਸਵਾਲ ਪੁੱਛਣੇ. You need to ask this question to the Indian government and you need to ask this question to the Canadian government. ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਭਾਈ ਤਲਵਿੰਦਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਪਰਮਾਰ 85 ਤੋਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ 88 ਤੱਕ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੀ ਧਰਤੀ ਤੇ ਰਹੇ. He was never charged and he was never convicted. ਸੋ ਕਿਸਨੇ ਲਗਾਇਆ ਇਲਜ਼ਾਮ ਤੇ ਕਿਸਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਭਾਈ ਤਲਵਿੰਦਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਪਰਮਾਰ ਨੇ 에ਅਰ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਬੰਬ ਧਮਾਕਾ ਕੀਤਾ? ਸਿਰਫ ਭਾਰਤੀ ਹਕੂਮਤ ਨੇ. ਕਿਸੇ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਪਹੁੰਚਦੇ ਆ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਲੜਨ ਲਈ ਐਂਡ ਇੰਡੀਅਨ ਗਵਰਨਮੈਂਟ ਟਾਰਚਰਡ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਭਾਈ ਤਲਵਿੰਦਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਪਰਮਾਰ ਐਂਡ ਕਿਲਡ ਹਿਮ. ਕਿਉਂ ਮਾਰਿਆ ਗਿਆ ਫਿਰ ਭਾਈ ਤਲਵਿੰਦਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਪਰਮਾਰ ਨੂੰ ਜੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ 에ਅਰ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਬੰਬ ਧਮਾਕਾ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ? Now is the truth and the reality. Who is and who was behind Air India bombing? Look at all these faces. पहला है सुरिंदर मलिक, दूसरा है ब्रिज मोहन, तीसरा है देविंदर आलूवालिया. वो Indian diplomats है, those who were expelled in 1985 after Air India bombing. मेरी परिवारां नूं बेनती है, question this to the Indian government जिन्हां ने पिछले 40 साल तो ये इल्जाम खालिस्तानी पक्षी सिखां ते लगाया है. सुरिंदर मलिक दा परिवार उस जहाज विच होना चाहिदा सी, उस हादसे विच होना चाहिदा सी, पर आखिरी समय इसने अपना परिवार कढ़िया ते तुहाडे परिवार जिहड़े है वो उस बंब धमाके विच मारे गए. Now Sikhs for Justice is offering $25,000 to get any intel, to get any information if these Indian diplomats who were expelled, whether they are dead or alive. If Canada is not investigating, if India is not investigating, we will investigate the role of Indian diplomats who were expelled in 1985. ਤੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਹਮਦਰਦੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਪਰਿਵਾਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ.
So, interestingly, it's his angle I find quite interesting on this. He's just offered this massive reward, the $25,000 reward. I don't know where he gets all his money from. It was $1 billion recently that he was going to offer to pay to join Trump's peace delegation. But anyway, that's beside the point. But he's offering a $25,000 reward for information to basically track down these missing diplomats. It's the Indian diplomats that he's focusing on. Why? Okay, that's a good question, because we've often, and it does actually align with stuff that we talked about here on the show quite regularly, and stories that we've covered, even not even related to Air India, but to other transnational repression stories. The Indian consular infrastructure is now seen to have been the primary vehicle for RAW's transnational repression plots. It launches its operations from the consular infrastructure. Now, it's not unusual. We do know that the consular infrastructure for most nations usually contains intelligence agents who operate in countries behind the safety, let's call it, the immunity, diplomatic immunity. They can plan and launch operations from embassies, knowing that actually there's nothing the host country can really do much about. So we do know it is very realistically and very likely that India does and has launched transnational repression operations from its consular infrastructure. That's not a conspiracy theory. It is probable fact, and I don't think it's even too controversial to say that. India, of course, denies it, but you know, it's the worst kept secret in the world. And as I say, it's not a new theory. This, even from the 1980s, it goes back the same theory, even through to the assassination of Bhai Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Surrey, in Canada. The modus operandi, the way that they do these things, remains identical. Use the diplomatic cover of consulates to coordinate surveillance, fund assets, execute these black flag operations. So again, it's not unreasonable to assume that the Air India bombing was actually planned, executed, or whatever, was linked to the consular infrastructure, to diplomats essentially, and maybe even diplomats or intelligence agents posing as diplomats. So again, just to sort of support this premise, I want to look a little bit at some of the evidence from history and high-profile figures and intelligence agencies that have finally actually begin to say a little bit more publicly what we've been talking about regularly. The obvious one is the recent one. It's the one of Hardeep Singh Nijjar and the investigation around that. Now, Justin Trudeau, the former Canadian Prime Minister, he declared publicly that he had credible allegations linking Indian state agents to the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. It was backed also by Five Eyes intelligence. Five Eyes, obviously, US, New Zealand, Australia, the United Kingdom. So they all backed this intelligence. It specifically highlighted communications involving Indian diplomats in Canada. So we know the Hardeep Singh Nijjar case involved Indian diplomats. The Panoon case, Gupta himself, in his murder for hire plot, the US Department of Justice, in their indictment against Nikhil Gupta, it explicitly names an Indian government official, CC1 he was referred to, who was directing the plot from within the state apparatus, again through the consular infrastructure. And then, of course, linking back to 1985 and the Kanishka bombing, several Indian diplomats at the time were quietly asked to leave Canada following the bombing. And evidence emerged that a diplomatic pouch, which is basically a bag owned by the diplomats, a diplomatic pouch, which by virtue of being a diplomatic pouch means it is immune from search, means the host country is not allowed to open it, search it. It is believed that that diplomatic pouch was potentially used to move material or documents linked to state-sponsored operatives behind the Kanishka bombing. So why is Panoon focusing on this specific angle now? Well, it's a bit of a strategic masterstroke once again from Panoon. By targeting the missing diplomats from that era, what he's trying to do is just peel back this layer of diplomatic immunity that's protected the architects of this bombing for 40 years. So what he's trying to do, if these individuals can be located and then linked to this plot through RAW, it collapses the whole Sikh terror narrative that India has been using ever since. It basically means that whole narrative that it was Khalistani terrorists behind this bombing, it just means it was nonsense. It's not true. It actually was indeed a plot hatched by RAW and executed through the consular infrastructure. And enough evidence does point to that. Read Soft Target as a prime example of that. And it does lead to a big question. Is there a chance for a new inquiry to be reopened in Canada? Well, yes, actually, there is, technically. Because in a court of law, the legal framework of new and compelling evidence can legally trigger a reopening of a cold case. It's tried and tested. That is why old cases can be reopened if there is new and compelling evidence. However, you've got to look at this a little bit more pragmatically, a bit more realistically, about resistance coming from all sorts of parties. CSIS is a prime one. Why would CSIS, for example, and figures like a guy called Bob Paulson, the former RCMP commissioner, or even the current leadership, Mike Duhem, why would they resist this? Well, reopening the Kanishka case would expose massive intelligence failures that they were responsible for in 1985. We know that CSIS erased, this is the Canadian Intelligence Service, we know CSIS erased surveillance tapes at the time that could have identified the true culprits. So a new inquiry would basically uncover that. It would uncover, well, at the very least, incompetence, or worse than that, potential complicity. So that's why CSIS and the RCMP would not really want a new investigation. They will resist it. And then there's the geopolitical fallout, the obvious sort of bigger picture story. Canada, at the moment, under Carney, is playing a bit of a delicate game. It's dancing a very delicate dance. Carney has never really stood up for Najjar. In fact, quite the opposite. So a full-scale reopening of the Kanishka case that would prove Indian state involvement would basically end diplomatic relations between Canada and India. It would turn this partner state of India, that Khan has reached the hand of friendship and commercial handshake across to India. It's basically turned India into a state sponsor of terrorism on Canadian soil. It just throws that whole trade deal, obviously, and everything else on top of that out. It's finished. It's over. And then, of course, we've got the United India lobby, who will apply enormous pressure within the Canadian establishment. It will pull every string, every pressure point it can to move past these old issues, these old stories. We don't want to talk about these old stories because they want to protect trade interests. And even if it means sacrificing justice for the Sikh community and, of course, the families of those 300 plus people killed in that bombing. The truth about Kanishka is the key to dismantling all the propaganda used against the Khalistan movement today. It is so important. Every time that we expose a diplomat as a handler for RAW, every time we expose a gang leader like Lawrence Bishnoi or a whistleblower like Kiriakou tells the truth, all these dots point back to the truth, what actually happened in 1985. The Indian government has weaponized its laws, its diplomats to persecute Sikhs globally. So the response from the Sikh community must be simple. It's got to be hard facts. It's got to be the relentless pursuit of the truth. The indictments we need more whistleblowers. And now, of course, we need people like Jaswant Singh Khalra. I mean, you can have a go about his rhetoric. You can say, almost make him a figure of fun. But ultimately, he is pursuing what we all need to pursue, and that is the truth. We need to get the truth out there because we know. We don't have the smoking gun yet, but we all know who was behind that bombing. The hard part is proving it now, and that it can only be done through a genuine reinvestigation where the truth actually comes out. So, keep pushing. As I say, the truth always has a nasty habit of reaching the surface. So on that note, let's move on to our comments column. Thank you to the audience, you guys out there, for all your contributions. To our regulars who are always there day after day, thank you for your tireless efforts and your comments and your contributions. And likewise, to those of you who just pop in, and to those of you who watch and don't even comment, thank you for your support. It does matter. It does count. TC, talking which, is one of our regulars. Hi, TC. You appreciated the podcast I did with Dr. Grail. It was an interesting one. Yes, it was yet another piece of legislation being weaponised by the BJP government to target its political dissenters. And you did actually point to a table that Dr. Grail showed. that illustrated how Sikhi is diametrically opposed to Hindutva ideology. And I did actually, for all of you who might not have watched that podcast, but do watch last week's podcast. It was interesting. This is the table. Oh, hang on. Can't really see that. Can I get that table? Let me just press a few buttons. There you go. Through the wonders of technology. There you go. That's a table that Dr. Growell showed up. It talks about three pillars, three concepts, obviously inherent in Sikhi, the meanings, and then really the motivating drive why it should be pushed, and why it sits completely opposing Hindutva ideology. The concepts of Sabat Dabala, Nirbau Niver, and Miripiri. So if you want to have a read of that, freeze the frame and have a look, or better still, go watch the podcast. It was a fascinating podcast. And next set, Nick. Nick says, Sikhs killed in Delhi riots, killed by other Sikhs instigating violence. No evidence brought forward to prove riots were by Indians. So this, again, this actually hints at misinformation, disinformation. It's always so hard to get the truth of what actually goes on in India. And this comment really just highlights that whole problem that I have, that many people have, particularly here in the West. And even people in India have the same problem, ironically, is getting the truth out of what happens in India, because the narrative is so controlled by the Gaudiya media. If you go onto Google and search Indian stories, you are overwhelmed with stories narrated by the Gaudiya media. You can't find, unless you dig so hard and deep, you cannot find the truth of stuff that goes on in India, because it's swamped by the official narrative as created and fabricated by the Gaudiya media. So as Nick says, Sikhs killed in Delhi riots, killed by other Sikhs instigating violence. Is that true? I don't know. I can't corroborate or I can't deny that fact, because it's impossible to get the truth out of these sorts of things. And Soft to Muffins refers actually to the same sort of problem that we have. One Sikh was killed by Indian police. Nobody talked about it, obviously not the Hindu channels, who criticised Modi day and night. This is what majority Hindu feel for Sikhs. It's far more dangerous than Hindutva. But then G. Pullar Ray, one of our resident critics at the moment, hello there, welcome back. Where and when again? Coming up with new stories. In other words, you making that up. Well, again, it's so hard to know the truth. And even you, G. Pullar Ray, you don't know the truth because you are fed a diet of misinformation. And it's so hard to know genuinely what's going on in the streets of India, and particularly the streets of Punjab and Kashmir, J&K, because the Gaudiya media has a lot to hide. It doesn't want you to know the truth. So even ordinary Hindus in India are kept in this sort of bubble of misinformation. They're fed this diet of bull just to keep them in control. It's to hide the truth behind this smoke and mirrors, as we call it. Stay safe. If people truly understood their history and stood with those who challenge oppressive systems, by Jaswant Singh Khalra, as a case in point, those systems would collapse. But as you rightly say, stay safe. Unfortunately, the vast majority of people are so easily manipulated. People are sheep. I get tired every day going on social media, watching people's opinions so easily manipulated by the media. The West is just as guilty as India on this. The globalists, the people who pull the strings, who own all our news outlets, it's so transparent once you see. For those, there was a Stay Safe, I think, quoted David Icke recently. If you really do want to understand the way the world works, read some of the work written by David Icke. I think The Biggest Secret. I read that 30 years ago. And for those of you who've watched the film called The Matrix, there's the blue pill and the red pill. If you take the blue pill, if I've got this the right way around, it opens your eyes. You start to see the truth. If you take the red pill, or is it the other way around? Anyway, if you take one pill, you see the truth. If you take the other pill, you go back to sleep. You live in happy ignorance. But once you take that pill that lifts the veils that you see the truth, you can never see the world again the same way, because you start to see what's going on. You start to join the dots. You see who's pulling the strings. It all starts to make sense. And you start to see those around you who've taken the other pill as sheep. You start to see how they're so easily manipulated. And sadly, it's almost a curse in many ways. Because, people like myself, I'm sure a lot of you guys out there, see how easy it is to manipulate people into a narrative, to align with a narrative. Propaganda, that's all it is, it's simple propaganda. The majority of people just believe what they see, hear, read, and they form their opinions based on that. And that is how they control us. That is how we are controlled so easily, because the majority are persuaded so easily into alignment. I see it on a daily basis, whether it was COVID, whether it's even anti-Trump sentiment, etc. Avatar Singh. Excuse me. Some people know Air India was done by agents working for certain agencies. Polish CIA knew about it in advance. Canadians kept out of it. Certain people responsible didn't fly that flight and left Canada, etc. Yeah, basically, Avatar, you're pointing to a lot of evidence that is out there in the public domain. A lot of evidence that was uncovered by those two Canadian journalists in that book, Soft Target. They brought out loads and loads of evidence, circumstantial evidence, that actually paint a big picture of guilt, that people knew this bombing was coming. People from the Indian side, people who had connections with India, whether it was diplomats or officials or whatever, people did not board that flight because they'd clearly been warned in advance there was a bomb on that plane. All sorts of suspicious activity point to that evidence that it was India behind that bombing, and that people were warned, don't get on that flight because there's a bomb on board. Absolutely, totally right. Now, Casing, thank you for this comment. You clearly disagree with the piece I did on Iran the other day. Absolutely, that is your prerogative. Interesting. You say it's propaganda. Okay, no, I'd say it's a difference of opinion. You neglected to mention the genocide in Gaza. Well, primarily because that's nothing to do with what we were talking about, with all due respect. You talk about the bomb in Tehran that killed a load of school children. Tragic, absolutely, a terrible story. The question is, who was behind it? You claim it was the United States. We don't know for a fact it was. It could have been. It might not have been. We don't know. But you do mix a lot of other stories into this whole comment that you make that I think are not, well, they're connected technically in some way, but they're not really connected to the story, that the article that I delivered about this story. You'd say I wanted to show, I had an intention of showing the evil of Nadir Shah. No, I wasn't. I didn't actually make any claim about evil Nadir Shah. I just gave you a factual account about his invasion and what Sikhs did to resist that invasion. I didn't actually pass any judgment, I have to say, deliberately so, on Nadir Shah. So I think you've misinterpreted what I said there. But ultimately, you do talk a lot about, you talk about, I didn't highlight the fact that India was more responsible for killing Sikhs than the Mughals or the Afghan marauders. My reaction to that is, no, it's not a competition about who was worse. They're all massacres. All massacres are bad. Whoever is behind it, it's not a competition to see who's worse. Was it Nadir Shah or was it India? They're both as bad as each other, to be frank, because they both had blood on their hands. But ultimately, the story that you do pick up on is, it was Sikhs who resisted it, and Sikhs stand up for freedom, etc., etc. So, and then you sort of talk about India, Pakistan, Sikhs will fight along Pakistan, absolutely, blah, blah, blah. But then you talk about this, and again, your agenda is very clear in your comment. And again, this is your prerogative, this is your opinion. I don't necessarily agree with it. But you are basically saying Iran, where's that part? You talk about, say, Iran has been incredible in this. What Iran has accomplished is amazing. It is actually, I agree with you. I do agree with that. I think what is amazing. What you're witnessing is a huge advance in asymmetrical warfare. The tide is turning. The playing field may become even thanks to Iran, North Korea and the Houthi tribes. This is needed to restore sanity. Well, no. I think what you're probably reaching for is to restore balance, to balance the dominance of the United States, the dominance of Trump, bombing countries like Iran, etc., etc. I don't necessarily agree with that. And you also say the freedom for Jaggi. Nonsense. I totally disagree with that. Sadly, we don't have time to sort of argue and debate that. I do respect your opinion, but I don't agree with it. But ultimately, what I would pick up on your point is you are painting Iran and its alliance with North Korea, the Houthi tribes in Yemen, etc. That is an axis of evil. I'm sorry to say this, and I profoundly disagree with your stance on this. These people are evil. They represent some of the worst, most authoritarian, murderous regimes on this planet. Not the Iranian people. That is a big difference, and I've highlighted that in the past. The regimes are evil. They need to be removed. This is why I totally support Trump's attack on Iran, and sadly he's been abandoned by allies, because that regime must be removed. It cannot be allowed to exist, because this balance you're talking about is an evil balance. If the Iranian regime get its hands on nuclear weapons, I only need to remind you about the existence of suicide bombers. Suicide bombers, Islamic extremists, ISIS, etc., use suicide bombers as a weapon of choice. You imagine arming these extremists with nuclear capabilities. The whole reason that nuclear weapons work is their deterrence. Mutually assured destruction, MAD as it's called. The reason that the West will never use a nuclear weapon is because they know if they use it, everybody dies. Everybody loses. Instead, what you're suggesting, if I interpret your comment correctly, is it's okay if Iran has its own nuclear weapons. No, it's not. In my opinion, I disagree with you on this, because the extremists, Islamic extremists, don't care about dying. They are happy to use nuclear weapons because they know they'll die, it doesn't matter, but they win in their eyes because they kill the enemy and they die in the process. They don't care. They've gone to see their 20 virgins, whatever it is. And that's the problem, is nuclear deterrence fails with these sorts of people. That's why they mustn't be allowed to have nuclear bombs, because they will likely use them, because they don't care if everybody on Earth dies. That's the reality. So I'm sorry, Casing, I do disagree with a lot of your comment. But as I say, I totally respect your right to make that comment. And thank you for your very considered words in that. It's an interesting discussion. I wish we had more time to sort of look at it in more detail. I would actually genuinely like to respond to your points with evidence and my own reasoned argument. Sadly, we're over time, so I don't have to do that. So apologies for that. But anyway, thank you for your contribution. It was appreciated, but we just sit on different sides of that argument. And SSC Tin responded, look, it was only the US and the West that stood up in support of Sikhs. Long live USA. Yeah, it's a question of sides, but it's complex. It's not black and white. There's a lot of shades of grey in all this, which is why it's sadly we don't have the time to try and, let's say, reach a mutual agreement on that, find some common ground on that, because there is common ground in there, of course. Maja Mafia. Oh yes, this comment in Punjabi. I'm going to have to quickly reach to my Google Translator. This translates as, it's a nice comment actually, we will definitely win. Keep fighting. We are the sword, the gun, the axe and the arrow. The chief, Sirohi, the weapon. This is our peer. Vahiguruji's Khalsa. Vahiguruji's victory. Khalistan Zindabad. Really, that's the important part. But ultimately, yes, we will definitely win. This comment, thank you, Major Mafia, for your comment. We will win. It is inevitable. You can't beat the truth. The people always win in the end. These are the mantras that determine the future. They are unavoidable. They are inevitable. As long as human nature exists, the truth prevails, the people always win. The will of the people wins, which is why Khalistan is inevitable. As Sukhwinder Dhillon says, Punjab solution, Khalistan. And the voice of Punjab once again reminds us, Khalistan Zindabad. That is ultimately what we are hopefully all united behind, because we all believe in that one single concept. Khalistan Zindabad. That is it for another day. Thanks so much for watching. Do let me know your thoughts. Do let me know if you disagree with my opinions, as Kay Singh did. Thank you. Yeah, it is absolutely interesting to hear your thoughts, because I'm not right all the time. If I've said some nonsense, let me know. Point out where I'm wrong. I do appreciate it. I don't take it personally. It's always nice to have a debate, have a bit of banter, a bit of discussion about it. So let me know. Ultimately, you can message me directly, message at satlogetv.com. If there's anything you'd like to bring to my attention. Yes, indeed, that is my email address. I do get those emails and I read every single one. Thank you to each one of you who have emailed me. Much appreciated. But that is it for another day. We are way over time as usual, so we must wrap things up. Have a great day. God willing, see you tomorrow.